Have you heard about this personal and professional podcast?
Coaching in Session with your host,
Michael Rearden.
I mean, if you want to be close to me, I know we're, on our Zoom call or on our remote call, but, this is a good opportunity for us to, talk about your work. And I want to get straight into it. For those who do not know who you are, what you have done, your history, please introduce yourself to the world.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leroy. I've been in education for about 25 years. I've written a couple books. I've coached basketball for 25 years, swimming for another 10 or so. I'm actively involved with youth, adolescents, mental health, emotional intelligence. It's kind of my bag, and I work with teachers all over the place and do my best to get everyone in a position so they can help kids be stronger adults.
It's kind of weird because I used to teach swimming too, and I was an educator myself. I taught music and special ed. Not 25 years worth, but I mean, I'm still young, I guess. But and I'm not saying that you're old, but
Trust me, I hit 50 this year, so I feel
you
it.
are a young soul. You are a young soul, and I think it's important that we have a sense of humor when it comes to education, because kids learn the best, I have found, when you can show them that you truly care and when you could be real with them. My first teaching position was in a middle school. And let me tell you.
Me too, man.
Let me tell you, I was not ready. I was good with elementary school kids, little kids, piece of cake, even high school kids, not a problem. Throw me in middle school. I was like, oh my God, I have to relearn how to teach children. I thought I knew everything. Well, I didn't. So I had to learn the process. When we start to look at education, there's different levels, right? We have elementary, middle school, high school, college. I want to get into the conversation of the importance of each level. This could be for either educators, coaches, parents, right? What should we be looking at during these times?
Well, I'm going to add another level to your grouping there, and that's 0 to 5 years old. There's that piece where whether parents are putting kids into preschools or Montessori or Head Starts or whatever, and then there's the parenting piece that goes along with that. I think I don't know if you have kids, but you talk to anyone who has kids and anyone who's in education, that foundational piece that kids should have, or we expect them to have when they walk into school, is so important. And I think that's the most troublesome thing right now in education, which is, why I wrote my book called Emotional Schools, is because we have kids who are not showing up with those foundational skills anymore. So, and I've, like you, I'm laughing because I have a master's in special ed, and I started as a special ed teacher, and I started in a middle school. And I'm like, we have a lot in common, buddy. And for me, I just thought in the middle school, it's like I'm working with a bunch of Bart Simpsons, and I had to just tune into Bart Simpson, and I figured it out. But anyways, I digress. But moving back, I've been a principal in a couple elementary schools. I've been in 3 high schools, middle school twice. And I gotta tell you that the most important place is primary, is kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. Along that goes with that 0 to 5 years. And it's especially important now because, the way our economy is, both in the United States and Canada, with inflation how it is, and parents trying to just keep up with the Joneses and keep up with their bills, they're not attaching as much to family as they want to or could because the way their jobs are. And then you throw technology into the mix. So in elementary schools now, what you're seeing kids coming in with a lack of foundational skills. And that's why kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and if you happen to be in a school where you have a preschool or a Head Start, you got to get on them early around that emotional intelligence piece and teach them how to, cope, and teach them how to self-regulate and understand emotions, because kids right now, they fly off the handle with the smallest of stressors. And when kids fly off the handle, they all fly off the handle differently. Break down and cry. Some hide under a desk. Some put their head down. Some swear at teachers. Some hit teachers. And so, the most crucial part in place in education right now is K to 3. And I'm not trying to minimize the other, demographic age groups or anything like that, because they all matter. But for me in education right now, that's where I would be investing my money, is into primary education and pre-K, that sort of stuff, because If we don't, we're seeing what happens. We're seeing what happens in the later grades, right?
Yeah. When we start to look at, these younger years, so let's just say for the sake of age, it's going to be 0 to 8 or 0 to 9 if you want to go up to third grade or fourth grade. When we start to look at the problems that they're facing today, were they predominantly, or were they big problems when you were growing up? So for example, when you were young and you were in first grade and second grade, did you see these problems, or is it something new that our world is facing today?
Yeah. So you're talking to a Gen Xer here, right? You're talking to a kid who drank water out of a garden hose because we weren't allowed in the house, right? So for me growing up, I don't know how old you are, but every generation it kind of changes, and it comes with the implementation of cell phones and technology, because our parents couldn't contact us by cell phone. So if we were in a tough situation as a 5-year-old, just say, and I remember I'd be up at the bus stop, a kilometer away, that I had to walk to the bus stop to wait for the bus. I remember getting into scraps with kids at the bus stop, no adult supervision, nobody coming around, and you'd wipe your nose off and head to school and nobody would know, and the one thing we couldn't get away with was skipping, though, because they expect you to be in school. But so I think back when I was in school, there was always one or two kids who might have been a little bit more challenged in terms of their emotional well-being or social emotional well-being. And I think now, as a special ed teacher, we can attest to the fact that kids weren't assessed, and I'm guessing autism was more prevalent than it was like in our day. And we probably had friends who we just said were just weird kids who had autism. So I think, back then we were just a tougher generation because we had to be. Now in schools, if a kid struggles, it's instantly, I want to call my mom, or I'm going to sneak to the bathroom to text my dad, or I'm going to, there's not a lot of working through things, because, on top of when kids do feel dysregulated or discombobulated, a lot of times parents will stick a phone in their face and they'll watch something funny on YouTube or whatever it is, or a game or whatnot. So their kids' ability to self-soothe now is dependent on so many other things. Whereas back in the 80s and 90s, even the early 2000s, kids had to be resilient, because you couldn't just call somebody to bail you out. You had to deal with tough situations, and because of that, we were a pretty strong generation, and I have 2 teenage kids, and watching them grow up, and the battle as a parent was trying to separate my kids from being raised the way I was raised in a world where I need them to be, tough and strong and persevere. But the challenge of being a helicopter parent is sitting right there, because, when my kids struggle, I just want to bail them out, right? I want to, and, so there's a mentality shift even in parenting. Like, I'm not raising my kids the same way I raised my dad. My dad raised me, right? He came from a country in Italy, and he came here, and, spanking was normal. And, and so there's a shift in how we parent too. So I think and that's what my goal is to help parents and teachers meander through how to deal with kids. And, I started a YouTube channel where, like, I just posted a video on ADHD and ADD, hoping to help parents. I'm going to post one on oppositional defiance disorder. And I want to get into those things, but from a perspective of parents and teachers working together, because, you worked in education. If parents and teachers, or schools and parents, aren't on the same page, it just turns into a different battle and a lot of finger pointing. And then there's a blame game. Those kids need a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week connection between the adults who are guiding them through life and trying to teach them how to persevere and have that grit and resilience. And so that's what my goal is to try to work with teachers and parents to stop the blame game, and let's bring it together, right?
What's the name of your YouTube channel?
Principal Leroy.
I'm going to subscribe to that, because
Right? Awesome.
you are speaking to my soul right now, because this is what we do here in Coaching in Session, and this is what I talk about. I talk about all of the things that you have said. I have episodes, I have blogs, I have all of these things. And it's so important that we learn from others, and not only ourselves and our only, like, from our situations, because we learn. I call them just golden nuggets. For example, if you want gold, you can go in a river, you could sift through all the rocks and you find this little tiny flake of gold. And you're like, well, it's not worth anything, right? But if you find 100 more pieces, all right, now we're, getting somewhere, right? We can smelt it and we can bring it down. And now we have a little nugget, right? That is essentially what all the episodes, all the blogs, everything that I'm doing is literally just a little flake. And every guest that comes on, sometimes they come in with just a flake and sometimes they come in with a gold bar like you have right now. And it's just wonderful because have an issue with technology today. Like there's no doubt, right? Cell phones have been used to connect us in a way, but we have never been more disconnected before. Where if I don't want to parent, if I'm overwhelmed and anxious and tired, I can give my kid a phone when I'm driving or something, and I can say, you know what? Distract yourself. Worry about something else. I need to regulate. Where they're just trying to be kids, right? They're trying to yell and scream and jump off stuff. And my son actually drinks from the hose. It is so funny because I'm
Nice.
like, it's so funny because I'm like, oh, I hope my wife doesn't see that. Where
Right? Right?
because she's more of the caring and loving and she wants, make sure he doesn't get hurt. And I'm talking about like if he's jumping off the sofa, I just look at him, I go, whatever. And if he's doing crazy stuff, I go, whatever. Because I understand I'm not supposed to get in his way. He needs to go through it. I have only one rule when it comes to, I do want your take on this too. I have one rule when a parent should intervene or go in and address something is when they get physically hurt, like literally they're bleeding, they got a broken arm. I'm not going to say, well, just rub some dirt on it. I'm going to say, hey, all right, what's going on? And then I give him that emotional support that he might need and understand like, all right, if I'm truly hurt, dad's there to, help me, support me. What is your take on a parent interacting with a child if they maybe do something inappropriate or do something that might seem a little bit dangerous or go all the way to the severe and they get hurt?
Yeah. So I don't know if you know who Barbara Coloroso is. She's she's back from the 70s and 80s. Write her name down, dude. She was revolutionary. Well, not really even revolutionary. She's just someone who has written books on natural consequences. So, for example, she'll use the analogy if a kid sits there and refuses to put their jacket on. So up here in Canada, winters are cold. Like you go outside, it'll be minus 15, minus 20 Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's freaking cold. We'll just say that. And her feeling is it's like, okay, well, I've asked you 3 times to put your jacket on. Go outside without a jacket on. And the message there is the kid's going to go outside and go, holy crap, this is cold. And up here in Canada, I laugh constantly because I'm the principal of a high school, and teenagers constantly wear hoodies when it's minus 15, minus 20. And I look at it and they'll do anything to be cool, right? Cool as in I'm cool with my friends. And it's like, where's your winter jacket? But when they get to grade 12, they start wearing winter jackets again because they kind of common sense jumps into place. But I'm really big on natural consequences. So in all of my schools, I believe in co-regulation when it comes to working with kids who don't yet know how to self-soothe. So if I have a kid who's completely dysregulated, has never had anybody come in to coach them around self-soothing, I will dive in way sooner. So I'll use an example. I had a kid probably about 6-7 years ago, transferred into my school. And he came to my school and, he wouldn't take any compliments. He was just angry all the time. His file showed up, social worker shows up. He's been physically abused most of his life. Right. And so with that kid, right off the bat, when he was emotional, I was in there breathing with him. I didn't let him sit in that because he needed that attention right now. And I needed to go at that boy. And I needed to work with them. I needed to self-soothe. I needed to reframe his mind positively. So you step away from something like physical abuse to a point where there's a kid and I know these don't exist in a utopian family where everybody's wearing white togas and green wreaths around their head and everything's the best that can be, which doesn't exist. But let's just say that's the 10 and 1 being abused, 10 being up here. And I think you have to work on a spectrum on that scale as to how you intervene with your kids. Now, I'll go to my kids. I use my daughter as a perfect example. Well, I'll even use my son, but they're both very athletic kids. My ex-wife and I, we divorced early. And so my kids have had certain struggles. They had an adverse childhood experience because divorce is tough, right? thankfully my ex-wife is a teacher, special ed teacher. She knows her stuff, but it still affects our kids. Oh, and one thing that I've always done with my kids, and I learned very early, and it started with my son. I put him to bed and he would cry, and I had to sit as parent. I'm like, okay, I'm going to wait this out to see how long. It took him 10 to 15 minutes, and then he'd cry himself to sleep, right? And, and if it went past 10 to 15 minutes, then I knew something else was wrong. He maybe had a shitty diaper, or he was hungry, or he was being irritated by something. And I'd go in and intervene because I could tell by his cry. My daughter would cry for 5, 6, 7 hours. Like, I would let her go because I tried to test her like in the first little while, and she would cry. And I was like, holy cow, I can't do this. And so what I figured out is I would go in, and it sounds horrible that I let her cry for 5 or 6 hours. I had the time when we had the camera and stuff like that. And I sat outside her door and cried. It hurt my heart so much. But I got to the point with my daughter where I'm like, okay, no, she needs something else. So when I put her to bed, I just lay with my hand through the crib, and she held onto my finger, and she was asleep in minutes. And eventually, so I had to do the exact opposite with my son. I was able to leave him. He cried himself to sleep. With my daughter, I tried it. I tried because I listened to the book. I read the books, let him cry. And it was probably one of the things I wished I didn't wait 2 weeks, but I'd give her my finger. Then eventually she could just touch my hand on the crib. And then eventually I had my hand down. And then eventually I'd power roll out of the room. And then she'd put herself to sleep, right? And so for her, it was different. And so as a parent, you need to know who your kids are. And just because you have a mom and a dad, that doesn't mean your kids are going to show up with the same characteristics, And, and one of the things I use my daughter again. So, you go to getting to the point where you get hurt. So she plays competitive volleyball, and she's very good and very aggressive. And, there was this one game where somebody, they shanked it off their arm, and it went over into where the players are. And she dove for it, saved the bump, and you could hear this crash. And as a parent, I just sat there because this is one of the things I did with my parents with my kids, until I hear that cry, and the cry, I'm not moving, and I could see all the parents up around me jump up, and you could see they want to just go, and it's not even their kid. And the one of the ladies beside me that I know, I'm like, no, just sit. She's going to be fine. And she comes out, and she's limping. You could see her that she wants to cry so badly, and she's clenching, and finally she drops to a knee, and you could see that it's hurting. And even the parent next to me looks at me, she goes, are you going to go out there? I'm like, no, she's got coaches, she's got medical staff. I'm not going to go out there, and I didn't. But then afterwards, my daughter needed me to tell her how proud I was of her for being resilient, for being tough. But before I told her that, I hugged her, and I held on to her, and I petted her, and I kissed her on the forehead, and I held her close, and I said, I hope you're okay. And then I kind of looked at her. I said, you're a trooper there. Oh, and then as I'm walking away, I'd lean over my shoulder. I looked at her, and I just kind of give her this sarcastic, I'm like, I still think you could have sucked it up, right? And she laughs, but it's this accordion of self-soothing co-regulation, and you got to know your kids. And when I say to you, or I say to any parent, that cry, and I think parents don't know when that cry is serious from a kid. And a lot of it's because they're not as in tune to their kids' emotions as they were prior to technology. And I was the dad who's in the yard with my kids, doing things in the house. I always bought Nerf footballs and basketballs because then we could use them. My son's a big basketball player. I actually put a backboard up in the living room because I'm a single dad. I can do what I want. We could shoot hoops in our house, right? And so that's the kind of but because I was so attached and I was with them that much, I knew their cry, I knew their pain. And I think that's where the helicopter parenting comes in, or the lawnmower parenting comes in, because they don't know that cry, or they're not willing to listen to that he's hurt or she's hurting, I need to go, right? Whereas you can hear some cries, it's like, no, they can work through that. They can do this. And that's one of the things when you mentioned about making connections with kids in school, as a principal and as teachers, we know our kids' cries, at least in the schools that I'm in, because I teach emotional intelligence and I preach it and I lead that way. And so we know where that line in the sand is with our kids, where they need to persevere and when they need co-regulation. And, of course, and that's where you get in the kindergarten, and the co-regulation piece is obviously a lot more. So we went off on a tangent on you, dude.
I loved every bit of it.
Did you? You're good.
Yeah. No, it was really, it was powerful.
Subject, right?
Yeah. I definitely know the cry that you're talking about. But I want to be careful with my words here because I don't want to make it seem like men have different barometers than a woman does. And even if they do, right? For example, like my wife, she will run to my kid. Something goes wrong. I got to run. One of my friends, she has a boy. She was asking me for some advice the other day. I'm like, well, you're always running to him and you're always doing these things. And she's having all these problems is because she's that type of like, I'm going to take care of everything for you type of mom. I'm not here to tell someone how they should parent, but she's having a bunch of different problems with her boy now. And so I'm saying, well, start to make some adjustments. And I just gave her a couple of easy adjustments that she can do in her day. Some of those included, like if he's refusing to eat, okay, cool. You say, okay, well, if you don't want to eat now, then sure, we'll put the food away. When you're ready, let me know. Right. It's something simple like that. Like, don't force him to eat. I understand that, coming from my mom, because I refused to eat sometimes when I was upset. So I remember one time, I forget what happened. It was like, I think I couldn't do something. Like I couldn't go to the toy stores, like something stupid, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
As a kid, I remember, I was like in third grade and my mom and my dad were kind of like downstairs trying to get me to eat. And I was like, no, I'm not hungry. And I was literally in my room, like hungry. And I was just like, yeah, I'm good. And then like, you could just tell like my mom was like distraught. She was like, he's not eating. Oh my God. And my dad's like, just let him be. Just let him be. And then I don't know what happened. Like they kind of coerced me. There was kind of, the right time, the right moment. I went down and I ate. Even though like I was being stubborn as hell, but we do have to, as a parent, understand and learn your child, because if you have a very stubborn child, understand
Oh,
that
yeah.
your child is stubborn. I'm
Yeah.
stubborn. My son is stubborn. He's super stubborn. So like when he doesn't want to do something, I go, okay. Like I understand he's going to eat and he eats really well. It's just some days, he has a mood, he has an attitude. Not a problem. I understand that. There's going to be, those developmental milestones that he's going to go into. He's 2.5 now. So he's going into the terrible twos, which is really 3 years old. But
Yeah.
he's looking to do things independently, and I allow him. So he puts on his shoes by himself, and I just kind of let him struggle most of the time. And even when we go to the grocery store and things like that, he just kind of does his own thing, and I just kind of walk with him, just make sure he's safe, no one kidnaps him, just like the bare necessities. But he has full reign to do what he needs. Of course, he's not breaking anything. But
Yeah.
many parents are like, don't touch that. Oh my God. I mean, if you break something, I'll buy it, whatever. But we are so worried about every little nitpicky thing: the food, the clothes, the
Yeah.
candies, the mac and cheese, the pizza. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, is it okay for a kid to be a kid? What's your take on that?
I think kids have to be. You know what? You nailed it when you were talking about the gold flecks. And I think when I was a kid, there's a town in northern BC. It's called Barkerville, and it's an old mining thing. And you go there and you can actually gold pan, and you get a little tube with water, and it shows your gold flecks. And when you're talking about that, I was thinking about like that is such a great analogy because it's very true. When we let kids be, when we let them be, and we let them go through those natural consequences like Barbara Coloroso talks about, or, Carol Dweck talks about a growth mindset. When we let kids be, we allow them to keep collecting those little flecks of gold. Like you said, I mean, you absolutely nailed it. And eventually those flecks of gold, are gonna turn into something very special for that kid, and I think you always have to teach kids right and wrong. Like, my son was one of those kids where I take him into a store. He was a tactile kid, right? And so he had to touch everything. So I had to do a lot of pre-teaching about, okay, when you're in a store, other people are going to touch that. Hygiene's important. And we'd go through that. But before I went into the store, I knew he was going to do his best. And, and I would try to help correct him. Like, okay, or we'd walk by something and they were little, those spongy things you put on your back when you're in the shower. Well, I'd almost deliberately walk by one of those because I'd stop him like, hey, do you want to check this out? And I'd grab it and I'd throw it at him. And right away he'd get his tactile thing in and we'd hang it back up. And it would almost diffuse some of that need to touch. But one thing I didn't do is if he did knock something off, it'd be like, okay, let's pick that back up. You got to do the right thing. And if he did break it, then I would have to take the cashier and pay for it. But I never beat him up afterwards for it. But I still tried to teach him, when you are in stores, you don't touch everything. You need to be respectful of the fact that somebody went in there and put a lot of time in stocking that shelf and all, because I want them to appreciate and respect, right? But I'm very much of that gold fleck. You need to keep collecting as much as you can, and you can only collect that by letting kids be, and I think food is huge. Anytime I run into parents and have issues with parents, one of the first things revolves around sleep and food. And sleep, it's an easy one. If it's a gaming system, unplug it. They'll eventually fall asleep, right? But food is a big one. They'll only eat chicken fingers. They'll only do this. And it's like, well, you know what? They'll eat when they're hungry. They will get to that point. And if you have to have chicken fingers more often than not, have chicken fingers more often than not. And it's like that accordion that I talked about earlier. You just slowly introduce things. Well, slowly, like, you might do, say, chicken fingers 4 nights a week. Well, you know what? Maybe if you're trying to get them off that, next week, do it 3 and introduce a different food. If they don't want to eat it, let them be hungry until they're hungry, because then they're going to come back and pick at something, might be something new. And it's like anything. You just slowly chip away at trying to change. And you never do. I mean, I still have, with my kids, there's certain things that they just prefer. Like my daughter loves frozen pizzas. She loves frozen pizzas. And my son loves Smokies. He loves the cheese in them, and I happen to love that stuff too, so it's okay. But, one thing that they do have is they will probably once or twice a week have food that's not good for them, but they will also eat salad. They will also do other things, because they happen to be athletes, and they were, have been guided over the year, and younger people who wanted to take care of their body. And so it's, as a parent, you kind of step in. It's like, okay, how can I jump in on what their coach said? Or how can I jump in on what their friends are eating this and they want this? Like yesterday, my daughter texted me, hey, we need to go for a drive. She just got her learner's license to drive, which is part of it. She goes, I need cucumber, I need balsamic vinegar, I need garlic powder, I need a cucumber. And I'm like, okay, let's go. And I'm like, what is she up to? And she made a cucumber salad yesterday instead of having because I had 7 frozen pizzas in there. And so I think we have to be very careful at how much we fight with our kids over food. And I think you nailed it. Kids will eat when they're hungry. And if it's chicken fingers, too much chicken fingers, just wean them off. Just like anything. Like when you're trying to lose weight, you do a couple pounds at a time, and I think absolutely nailed it. And I think that's what parents need to understand, is that it's okay for kids to suffer. It's okay for kids to have to work through hunger, have to work through embarrassment, have to work through anger, have to work through being overly happy. Like it's how you build resilience. It's how you build that intrinsic motivation in a kid. And I think your gold fleck, man, you should put that on a bumper sticker. That's a good one. I like it.
Well, I want you to make a YouTube video of it, and I'm just gonna like it. I'm gonna watch it. So it was definitely
right.
like a collaboration there.
You
One
bet.
of the things I want to touch base on is coaches and then teachers, because you talked about how your kids are into sports, and not only your kids in sports, kids are going to fall into a sport at
Yeah.
some point, right? They're going to do soccer, they're going to do volleyball, basketball, whatever, right? Typically, they're going to fall into some type of sport or band. They're going to have a teacher, coach, someone's there. And it's almost like, for some reason, I'm not sure why. Well, I do know why, but I do want your perspective, that they will listen to coach before they listen to mom or dad.
Oh, yeah.
Or they'll listen to coach before they listen to a teacher. So like coach is saying, I have to eat healthy. Mom, dad, like we got to get rid of the frozen pizzas because coach is telling me this. Okay, great. If you have a teacher that can relate to you, typically that could happen. But sometimes, teachers just are checked out, especially depending on what type of school district you're in. Because if you're in a low income neighborhood and you have a bunch of kids coming in with a bunch of different problems, the last thing they're worried about is math and reading. So they have a different set of problems. But I do just want to make it very clear of a coach teacher dynamic, regardless of income or race or anything, just like the dynamic between the two.
Yeah, that's you know what, you can throw peers into that group as well, I think, because I find that whoever your kids hang out with, that's when especially when they're in those teenage years, they're going to listen to them before the coach and before the parents as well, right? And what it comes down to is a I want to say it comes down to first and foremost passion and that intrinsic motivation. And so I'm going to talk about when kids are a bit older, like when I talk about my kids, because my son's 18, my daughter's 16. But what I really noticed, their love for their father and their mother, because it wanes, right? They start getting connections with all these other people. But when they hit like 11, well, all of a sudden, I remember for Evie, it was Coach Gabe, the swim coach. And this guy was just a machine swimmer. And he was on I believe he made the Canadian national team. He was that good, right? But what it comes down to is the reason why they connected and she bonded with him was because they shared this passion for swimming. And then on top of that, they had this attachment bond, this relationship piece that came in. They became, for her, separating his message or his presence would have been like taking her stuffy that she had when she was a baby and trying to take that away from her because she had that tight bond. And, and on the flip side, I've watched my daughter with other coaches where it's just this huge gap. Even though they shared this passion in volleyball, the attachment and the relationship was just not good. It was abrasive and it pushed her away, right? So, and it's the same thing with teachers. I find teachers could be teaching calculus, they could be teaching social or English. And for teachers, for sometimes you run into that kid who, loves math, because they exist. There's kids who love math and they bond on that passion. But first and foremost, I find that the teachers who are, the ones that have that attachment with kids, it all comes down to that personal connection, that bond, but they have something that teacher's able to relate, and for me, for example, I've always been really good at working with at-risk kids. And, because I had grown up as a teenager, I went down some wrong paths and, just some experiences in my life that were tough. And so when I became a teacher and I ran into those kids with some of those challenges, I could relate. I was also an athlete when I was younger, so I could relate to the kids that I coached. And so there's this intrinsic motivation that's attached to a personal passion when you get to a certain point. And then when you throw in that attachment and that relationship, they're going to stay and want to listen to that person and hang on to their every word more than their teacher or their coach or even their peers, because that's what's hitting their soul, right? And you can vice versa. If you have kids who aren't into sports and have school and friends, if their friends provide a passion, unfortunately, it can be negative at times, that passion and that attachment, they're going to push away from their family, right? And so that's why when you talk about going back to your kids and letting them experience what they want to experience, as a parent, they have a little tune for, they're sitting there watching and observing where their passion is. What are they getting into? A lot of times we try to force Lego onto kids, or it's like, I'll buy them this, I'll do that. And for me, I wanted my kids to experience everything. There was weeks where I was trying to find a 4-leaf clover. That's what their whole mission. And it was like, we had magnifying glasses and, and we're looking for 4-leaf clovers. But at that moment, I stuck with it because that was their passion and our bond, right? And, for my son, it transferred into, I can burn these ants with this. And I was like, okay, let's be careful. But you flow with them, and then the other piece is you need your kids to know what your passions are. Like I grew up playing basketball and I coached basketball. So both of my kids at birth, they were in that little baby thing. When I coached, I brought them at 6 months old into the gym and, all my players would kind of swoon over them and they listened to basketballs. They listened. I took them to the pool because I was a swimmer and they love to swim. And so you introduce them to these things. And if they don't grab onto your passion, like here in Canada, hockey is massive. And, I'm not a hockey player, but I felt pressure. And I brought my kids to ice skating lessons and I just prayed that they didn't like it. They didn't like skating. And I was like, hey, they're not going to be hockey players. And, sure enough, they're volleyball. And even if they turned out to not like sports, if their passion was volcanoes or if their passion is something else, as a parent, don't dismiss it. Don't get bored of it. That's where parents have to be resilient and show some grit. It's when your kid has a passion, encourage it, fork out the money for it. Like do what you can to keep them in that mode where when they find that something that intrinsically motivates them, you got to capitalize on it. Even if it lasts, like I said, those 4-leaf clovers lasted 2 weeks. but they were intrinsically motivated at that point. I was not about to take that away, because you talk fleck of gold, that was a nice fleck of gold. That so when the next passion came up that they were intrinsically motivated for, maybe they stuck on it for a month and a half, and then sure enough, both of my kids, they both did swimming and they stuck to it for years. And then all of a sudden it's like my son was basketball's it. And we were all over the States playing ball and I just, it cost me a lot of money, but I did it because it kept him out of trouble, and that's where his passion was. And now my daughter, it's volleyball. And as a parent, you chase passions with your kids. Otherwise, that intrinsic motivation won't connect. And that's why coaches and peer groups win over parents, win over other people in their lives because of those two pieces, right?
Mm-hmm. I do want to talk to you about something you said toward the end, money versus time, because I think sometimes parents, they can get things misconstrued in what their child needs, because they might look at their own personal life. I didn't go to Disney World when I was a kid. I didn't go to this place, or I didn't do this. So I'm going to make sure my child does all the things that I did not do. And it goes against what you said, right? Finding their passion. What do they want? What do they like? Just because you like Disney World does not mean they like it. Or just because you like basketball does not mean they will like it. You have to figure out what is for them. But then at some point, they're not so much concerned about the money. They're not saying, hey, mom, you didn't buy me a new dress today, or dad, you didn't buy me new pairs of shoes today. No, they're more concerned about, are you paying attention? When you're watching them on the bench and they're playing a sport, for example, are you on your phone? Because they're going to look up at you and they're going to see if you're there, you're present, or you just absent. And what happens so quickly with a lot of preteens, especially, is that they see their parents are checked out. So they're like, why even bother? And, they're so more readily going to what you said, peer groups. My peers are going to give me the attention that I'm seeking because mom and dad are too busy, or my teachers don't really care. They can't relate to me. So, peers are definitely going to be a huge factor in how a child develops, or how your child develops, because, you can't choose their friends for them. Of course, you can encourage them to look at character, what are good traits in a person, what to look for. If a person makes you feel this way, do you think that would be a good thing to have long term? Teaching, the basics to be a judge of character. Just the other day, I heard a quote, and I don't know if I agree with it wholeheartedly yet, is that not everyone deserves your respect. And I was like, that's kind of negative in my mind. But then I was like, there's some truth to it, where someone can just belittle you. Maybe they have limiting mindsets. There's, a bunch of negativity. I mean, we can definitely understand where they're coming from, the emotional, the emotional intelligence aspect of it, and say, you know what, they're probably in a rough place right now, right? They could have something going on at home. But then again, it's like, is it your job? Especially, when you want that peer acceptance to make or to have someone like you. And I'm sure you can see that in the schools, is that many of these children growing up is that they're always looking for validation. They want the gold star. They want the A. They want the good job. And I had a coach come on, I don't even know what episode, but she said something really cool when, if her kid ever brought her something like a A+ on a test, or a really cool drawing that won an award or something at the school, she would take it, put it down, and then talk to the child. Say, hey, son, hey, daughter, how was your day? I just want to let you know I love you. All right. And then once that interaction was done, then she picked up the test, or she picked up the art, or whatever it was that the child wanted to show her. And then she said, now let's look at this. And then it was, so the child separated what they thought was going to get them the validation versus mom would always validate me, or dad will always validate me. Because we can look at our peers growing up. Sometimes they're not going to validate you, because if you're going against the grain, they're going to say, you're not wearing the latest shoes, you don't have the new threads or whatever. Guess what? You're outcasted. So in a sense, we're looking for that validation at multiple points in our life. How can we navigate through those moments?
Well, the biggest thing when I talk about 0 to 5 years old is attachment. And we have to develop attachment bonds with our kids early. And if we do that early where that attachment is there, that need for validation will decrease. And so, there are kids who require more validation because that attachment bond wasn't as strong when they were babies, right? That being said, you also just have kids, attachment bond was strong and parents did the right thing, but you have kids who come out and they're just a little more anxious. They're a little more sensitive and they can't help that. That could be because of their great grandparent down the road had some of those genetic traits. And so as a parent, when you're confronted with a kid or your child that needs validation, just like, validation is it's tied to emotions, right? And it's the same thing as when you have a kid who's angry or too happy or sad or depressed or embarrassed. Validation fits right in there. You have to figure out at what point that teachable moment is appropriate. Just like your friend there, that coach you had on, that was fantastic. When her child showed up and wanted that validation right off the bat, she redirected, knowing exactly where she was going to come around. Because, I use the word manipulation quite a bit when I'm working with kids, and it has a bad connotation. People think, oh, you're manipulating. It's like, yeah, I'm manipulating an emotional response so that I can bring in so I can manipulate that. In science, we use the word manipulation all the time, right? And there's no reason why we can't manipulate certain factors to get kids to learn. And so, the way she manipulated that redirection over here and brought it back, providing that validation in a different way, and then bringing that test back to just look at the academic success and persevering and maybe studied a little bit more is the way you need to do it. But again, it ties to all of those emotions that kids have. And it's a matter of understanding what way you're going to jump in and co-regulate or teach that child in that particular emotional state, whether it's the need for validation, the need to soothe because they're angry or whatnot, right? And sometimes it is just kind of taking a step back and leaving them and saying, I'll be back in 5-10 minutes. You take some deep breaths, I'll be back. And then you come back, right? But you have to use a different strategy or a different method for every kid you encounter, because, and there are cookie cutter approaches that work with all kids. And I use them in school. Like I can, if I have kids melting down, I can use the same approach on 70% of them. 30% though, I'm going to have to do what that coach did, where she redirected and came in on the other end to build that confidence and deal with the validation, right? And so, but for the most part, as in a class, you can teach kids the same subject, the same teaching strategy, but you're going to have, 10 to 20% of kids who need something else. And it's the same thing, right? So it's just a matter of finding that teachable moment so that you can come in and co-regulate the right way at the right time.
What is one takeaway from your book that you would like every parent, teacher, whoever reads it to have with them at all times?
I think the biggest thing that I need educators, teachers, school districts, whoever's in the political position at a state or provincial government to understand is that emotional regulation is the key to success. And if you do not teach kids early and often about their emotional well-being and how to soothe, how to become somebody who can find intrinsic motivation and passion, if we don't teach that, it doesn't matter what how there's constantly, I know in the States, they use test scores to determine if a school's going well. Well, if you're dumping money into testing and to doing professional development for teachers that revolve around assessment and teaching strategies, and you don't jump onto social emotional learning, especially in today's day and age where kids, can't handle even the smallest of stressors, we're dead in the water and we're going to see a decline in how kids. So the biggest thing that I want people who have kids or work with kids to do is to truly understand how important it is to work on that emotional intelligence very early with your kids so you can build that perseverance, that grit, that intrinsic motivation, that kindness, that empathy, that compassion, all of that stuff. And And the other piece that I want to throw out at parents too and teachers as well is that you don't stop once they get to kindergarten, and I go back to that. I just last year's in June's awards assembly when we're sending the grade 7s off to the high school. And I said to the parents, I said, do not under any circumstance go away. And I said that as, parents, you tell your kid, I will not go away. Because parents, when kids get to the high school, they're like, go away, dad. They don't want them there. And, that's what they think they don't want because their peer group is more important. And I reiterate to parents, tell them to screw off and that you're going. And if there's a problem with a teacher or if there's an issue at school, be the squeaky wheel. Go in there regardless if they think you're embarrassing them or not. Do not ever go away. And again, that goes back to that whole kids, needing validation or needing help with this. Teenagers will push. And so it's important that we still co-regulate and we still teach, even though they don't want it. And I think that's what happens with parents. We go all in on our kids when they're little and I watch it because my eldest son, like I was all over him for a lot of stuff and I do less with my daughter, but I have a daughter and a son. My daughter's my sweet little angel, and God forbid anybody messes with something on her head. My son, he can, somebody can throw him off a bus, and I'd be like, get out. With her, it's like, so there is a difference as a parent when you how you work with your kids. But the key thing from my book is that parents need to understand, and teachers need to understand, or anyone who works with kids, is that you need to dive into those teachable moments, that co-regulation stuff, and that emotional intelligence as early and as often as you can so that, our kids have that strength when they get older or when they're in a tough situation where they're about to do something stupid, and we want them to be able to say, hey, I'm just not, and they will still do stupid things because they have to do that. But hopefully it's not, you've taught them well enough that it might be just, I'm going to have a sip of that beer and I'm not going to drink all 6 behind the gym or something, like I use vaping as one of those things that, holy man, what a challenge that was dealing with. But if you teach them well enough, maybe they'll hit that vape and they'll only do it once, or maybe they'll quit after a month, or maybe they don't touch it at all. And that's why as parents, it's a 0 to, my son's 18. I'm not leaving him alone when he goes to college. He's going to be there, but I still don't trust the guy to study. So I will call him once a week saying, how much did you study this week, dude? Right? As a reminder. I'm not going to just, even though he's out of sight, out of mind, and my house is going to be cleaner, I'm still going to parent. I'm still going to teach,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. I like your view on emotional intelligence or just the emotional schools. I had a guest come on a long time ago, and we had a clash with the emotional intelligence bit, and I had to do a whole episode on it about emotional intelligence and how it wasn't the way, like her way. It's just, again, it goes back to like the easiest way I can explain it is when a child doesn't want to eat food. She was more like, you don't understand that you're hungry. We're not leaving this table until you eat. Versus like, okay, you don't want to eat now? Not a problem. We'll eat later. So this is why I say I prefer your method over hers if I had to pick. But again, there's an audience for that, I'm sure. But then there's an audience for this too. And I think this is so much more, what's the word I want to say? Appropriate for most
Michael,
children.
It's based on a growth mindset. That the kid who's sitting there, sure, when they're saying they're not hungry, as a parent, I'm going to say, come on, eat. Come on, eat. All right, you know what? Okay, don't worry about it. It's all about doing things on a spectrum. It's about the growth. It's going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It's still black and white to make it, because that's what my dad did. You're sitting there till those peas are gone. I sat there for 5 hours. Yeah, I might have ate the peas after 5 hours, but it wasn't the right way to raise me, and so there should be never a black and white. It should always be based on, okay, how do I get my child to grow from point A to B to C to D to, to Z, being, okay, my kid's going to do fine on their own as adults. They got good character, going to have a good job. They're going to be able to have a family and be a good parent, because that's ultimately what we want, and maybe they get rich so they can take care of us. That would be another plus. But, at the end of the day, that's what you have to do. And it's never, and working in schools, like especially working in special ed, those small incremental gains, they eventually, like your gold flakes, they turn into a bar of gold eventually. And so for somebody to go black and white, I don't believe in black and white. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, You have to be flexible. You can't be rigid when you're a teacher. One of the best things I learned from one of my cooperating teachers was you have to be ready for bear. And basically the saying is like, you have to be ready for whatever comes your way, because you might not know what you're going to get when you walk into the school that day. So some kid is going to start yelling and screaming and flipping desks. And you're like, you got to be ready for it. And it was something early on I learned very quickly, because behavioral management was easy for me. But when it came to like teaching them the way they needed to be taught was something I had to learn. So for each grade, I had to say, okay, this is how I teach them. And it was me learning on the job, me learning from other teachers that helped me be a better teacher or be a better educator. Where sometimes people, they're just stuck in their way, and then they wonder why they're struggling halfway through the year and the kids don't listen to them. And I mean, like, I didn't have any, or I'm not gonna say any, but like very little issues with behavioral management or kids not listening. Of course, you're going to have a child that, has their own agenda. But when they realize like it's not working, like my agenda is not working with this guy, it's almost like they kind of fade away. And I remember I had a third grader, and he was like climbing on the chairs and crawling under the chairs. He's the only one, literally the only one. And I remember going to the principal, I was going to the vice principal, and I was like, what do I do? It's like my first year, or it was my second year. It was my second year, and I'm like, what do I do? Like I don't know what to do. And then they're like, you can ignore it, you can do things, you can show them, like they're giving me all these options. What I did was what one of my cooperating teachers said is shut it down, just shut everything down. So if we can't stand up, we're going to sit down. So like we just dropped it down a level. We dropped it down where everyone was safe, everyone was still able to have fun, everyone was still able to learn, and we learned from that. And then eventually at some point, I remember it's the next year, he came to me, he goes, yeah, I'm done, being bad. And he just like talked to me. He's like, I'm done being bad. I go, oh, it's good for you. It was just so funny, because that year was always Tuesday. It was Tuesday when I had him, and a couple other heavy hitters is what I call the kids that are going to give you the run for the money. It was on a Tuesday, and I remember every Tuesday I'm like, well, I got to be ready for whatever comes my way. But it was so funny whenever the psychologists came in or the principals came in, because they had to do the paperwork, because he has a IEP. So like it was just so funny, because I learned the different dynamics. And then it was like most of the time they would come and they would say, I came here and I wasted my time because I thought I was going to get some good information of how he doesn't behave, but he was perfect. And it was because I found how to level with them, versus like, okay, you're going to rise up to my level, or you're going to meet me where I need you to meet me. And I find that to be one of the greatest struggles that parents are having, when it comes to, they want their child to be this basketball star or the best person on the soccer team. It's like, you're going to practice and you're going to be the best, when the reality is they're going to be exactly what they want to be. Maybe they have that drive, right? We can look at LeBron James and his son, right? Maybe he has that drive to be in the NBA, but maybe he just, wants to hoop with his friends right now. And then later on, be whatever he wants to be.
Yeah.
Whereas that expectation that many parents are saying that you're going to do what I'm expecting you to do, rather than you understanding what you would like to do. It's almost like I'm living, or a parent is living the child's life and not the other way around.
Yeah. And, I think you used the word class management, and that's the bane of my existence when I hear class management strategies or class management this, and it comes to parents as well. You got to remove the word management, because as soon as you put in the word management, it's like, here's the rules, you're going to follow them. If you don't, you're going to be either in a reward discipline situation, where what you did, you actually were just a behavior educator. It's behavior education. It's not about class management. It's about class education. It's about parental education. And I think we need to lose the management piece. There's obviously some management pieces around, okay, swimming lessons are at 3, got to get them to school at 8:30. We got to manage our time. We got to manage those things. But when it comes to children, we have to educate them. And you change the geographical dynamic in the class for the kid crawling all over the place, which was good, because what you did is you allowed that kid to get educated on the natural consequences of what his action brought. You didn't have to send him to the principal's office. You didn't have to, take him out in the hallway, berate him or anything like that. I mean, and I'm not saying kids shouldn't have to be, taken out of a class every now and then if they're going crazy, but somebody has to be on the other side of that classroom door to help with soothing and whatnot. But really, it's not about, it drives me nuts because I see these pro Ds on class management. It's like, oh my God, can we just focus and just call it behavior education? Because behavior, we have math education, English education, social studies education, science. Behavior is the biggest, most vast subject we need to teach, and it's not about behavior management. It's about behavior education. And that's why I know some teachers are way more successful than other teachers. Like, well, he doesn't behave like that for me, because I have it in school-based team meetings where the teachers where the kid is misbehaving, it's clearly the kid's fault because this teacher has these class management strategies, these rules that he's not following, where the other teacher's a little more chill typically because they're looking at that from a growth mindset. How do I educate this kid so they grow, right? And so you were a behavior educator, not a class manager. Just so
Good to know.
You know what? You didn't know the title of it or the jargon of it. You just did it naturally because you believe in growth, right? It's a big difference. So kudos to you, man.
Thank you. It's the natural instinct, I believe. I'm not saying every educator is meant for the job, but the ones that are, you can truly tell that they're passionate. And I can tell that you're passionate about the work that you do. Our conversation today was definitely, just a start of parents and teachers and, all in between, learning about emotions, learning about development, learning about how a life is formed and structured and develops, because it's easy, as we said early on, to be absent, right? Be an absent parent. Like, I'm going to give you my phone when I don't want to deal with you. I'm going to give you a TV dinner when I don't want to cook for you. I'm going to sit you on the sofa and we're going to watch movies and we're not going to talk. Like, there's, like, we have become disconnected. And this is a great episode, I believe, for individuals to reconnect at all levels from all walks of life. Again, you could be a child, you could be a parent, you could be a teacher, educator, and you're going to learn something from this. As we said with our analogy of the golden flakes, this is that, right? You take what you need, you leave what you don't, you sprinkle a little bit of this and a little bit of that wherever you want to, give your own unique taste. And that is what you can bring. Of course, before we leave, I would love for you to tell the audience where they can find you, because I'm sure they're going to be interested in your work, checking out your book. And then I know we have your YouTube channel, but let's hit that again.
Yeah. So if you are and I'm like I said, I'm just starting on YouTube. So I don't know. I mean, I started years ago, but I just put fluff on there. But now I'm putting videos that help parents and teachers. But if you want to find me, it's really simple. Just go to leroyslanzi.com. That's my website, and lists all my services. My books are on there. My book is for sale. Both of my books are for sale on Amazon. And so I would check that out. And if you want to just get a hold of me directly, you can email me at leroyslanzi@gmail.com. And I'd be happy to have a conversation. If you're a teacher or a school and you want to bring me in to do some professional development, drop me a line. It doesn't cost anything to send a few emails back and forth to see if we're a good match. And if there's parents or teachers who want some coaching, I do that piece as well on top of being a principal. And you can find me through my website, Leroy Slanzi.
Excellent. And I'll make it easy for everyone. All the links are going to be in the description box below. So just check him out, learn more about what he's doing. If you are a parent and maybe the principal or a couple of teachers at the school, slide this episode his way and say, hey, I got something for you to listen to. It's an hour of your time, but it's going to be the best hour of your life. So I do want to thank you, Leroy, for coming on, talking about your story and about your work.
Awesome, Mike. Hi, thanks for having me, man. That was a blast.